This video will show you how to replace the front sealed wheel bearing on a Pontiac Grand Prix. This will be located behind your front wheel. Let's get into it. Just a quick note about doing this job, you will need an alignment once we're done. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. The first thing we have to do is safely raise and support the front end of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. After that, remove all 5 of your 19mm lug nuts and we can get the wheel off of here. Now that we have the wheel out of position, let's use a spacer and one of our lug nuts to hold our brake rotor in place. Once you've done that, that's going to prevent the rotor from falling off. We need to remove our caliper next. Let's have a look along the back side. As we look along the back side of the caliper, we can see our two 15mm caliper bracket bolts. I'm going to fully remove my first bolt, just a quick inspection, and I'm going to start it back in a couple threads, preventing the caliper from falling down as I continue on fully removing the next. Now, as we remove our caliper, have a quick look at our brake pads. Confirm they're not worn at an angle or damaged in a way that they are not usable, in which case you'd want to replace them. These look fine, so I'm going to set this aside, putting no pressure on my flex hose. Now we're preparing to remove our brake rotor, so we're going to remove our lug nut and our spacer. Now this rotor is ready to come off. Commonly, it might be stuck in place up against the wheel bearing hub. If that's the case, you could carefully tap on the hat of the rotor along this area, but do not cause any damage to the braking surface or to your lug studs during the removal process. Remove your brake rotor, give it a quick inspection, we'll set it aside. We're moving along to removing our axle nut. We'll be using a 34mm socket. I'm using an impact tool to remove this mounting nut. If you are attempting to do it by hand, you might find that this wants to spin on you. If that's the case, you want to try to prevent that. You can use a pry bar diagonally past the studs down towards the ground. We'll use some penetrant along the axle and the wheel bearing hub. A hammer and punch directly in the center of the axle shaft. Let's tap on this, breaking the axle shaft free from the wheel bearing. As you can tell, we have plenty of movement from our axle. This is what we need to see. Now we have 3 pieces of hardware that we need to gain access to from along the back side of the steering knuckle. Now, while holding pressure on the axle, we have a nice gap in this area. We're going to start removing our 13mm headed mounting bolts. To remove these, you're going to find that it's easiest if you have a wobble extension. Essentially, at the end of it, it makes it so the socket can move a little bit from side to side. That's going to help us get past the flange. There's our first mounting bolt. Let's make our way to the next. Now for this upper mounting bolt, I've found that sometimes it's difficult to fully remove the bolt. As long as it's fully unscrewed from the wheel bearing, that's good enough, and we'll move along to the next. When you replace your wheel bearing, you should replace your wheel bearing hardware. onto the last mounting bolt on the other side. 13mm. Just a quick note about removing the final mounting bolt. The bearing may fall out of place. Make sure you do not get hurt. All right, let's make our way on the outboard side. So we're going to continue on with the removal of the bearing. You may have to tap on the wheel bearing to break it free from the steering knuckle located behind. As you can tell, mine is sliding out of place. Something I would note is typically you're going to find that you have a backing plate of sorts. This is generally just for the ABS wire on this type of model vehicle. So we're holding on to that plate. We can press out the bearing. Just go ahead and slide it right out of there. There it is, friend. Let's remove this shield. We'll set that aside. Now the next thing we have to do is clean the mating surface on our steering knuckle. We want to go along the flange area here where we can see any raised areas, and I also typically like to clean inside of the port as well. You might find some corrosion. That's a nice smooth surface. I'm using my wire brush inside of the circular port. And now while I still have my tools out for this, I'm going to make sure that this flange area is cleaned as well. Nice. Continuing with our cleaning, we're also going to be cleaning our metal plate. After a thorough cleaning and inspection, I always like to use anti-seize on my flange area of the knuckle and inside of the port. That's going to help prevent the bearing from getting stuck in this area. While we're doing that, we'll also put some on the splined area of our axle, not necessarily on the threaded portion. Obviously, it's your vehicle, coat it as well as you deem fit. Let's install our small plate. Of course, we will want to align our mounting bolt ports as we bring the bearing into place. Now it's time to install the wheel bearing. We'll slide it over the axle shaft. We're bringing it all the way in towards the flange area on that steering knuckle and our plate. Now it's time to install all three of our mounting bolts from the inboard side. So we have our wheel bearing and our plate in place. I'll start my bolts through. Now at this point, we're only starting in all three pieces of hardware. Once we have them all started in, we can snug them up and then torque them. Okay, that one started in. Started in as well. Now that they're all started in, we can snug and then torque each one of these bolts to 96 foot-pounds. Okay. I've got my torque wrench. There's that one. Okay, that one's torqued. Let's continue on. There's that one. Okay, that's all three pieces of hardware. Now, prior to installing our brake rotor, we need to make sure we clean and inspect our wheel bearing hub surface. Use some parts cleaner and a wire brush. We're attempting to remove any raised surfaces. Let's apply some anti-seize to the wheel bearing hub mating surface. Just make your way around. A thin coating should do. So now we're looking at the back side of our brake rotor. We need to make sure we clean and inspect the area where our wheel bearing hub would sit. We'll use some parts cleaner. Let's get our brake rotor in place. Once you have it on there, we're going to hold it in place using a spacer and one of our original lug nuts. We're moving along to installing the caliper next. The caliper is going to slide over the brake rotor, and we have to install our 2 mounting bolts. We'll bring this down into position. Now we're going to start in both of our mounting bolts. Once they're both started in, we can snug them up and then torque them to 133 foot-pounds. Now let's remove our lug nut and spacer. Now it's time for the axle nut. When you go to install it, you may find that this wants to spin on you. You can prevent that in different ways. You could either press on the brake pedal. You could also use a pry bar directly down towards the ground at an angle, or you could use a screwdriver inside the fins of the rotor, down along the bottom area here. That will help prevent it from turning if you rest it against that caliper. Time for the axle nut. When we go to install the axle nut, you want to make sure you use a hand tool for this. We're not using an impact tool. That could cause damage to the bearing. There we are. Okay, let's get this to an area we can torque it. Now I'll torque that to 118 foot-pounds. Let's reinstall our wheel. Start on all 5 of your 19mm lug nuts. Once you have them all started on, snug them up. We'll get the wheel back on the ground and then torque each lug nut to 100 foot-pounds. Now that I have the wheel back on the ground, I'm going to be torquing each one of my lug nuts to that 100 foot-pounds in a crisscross manner. Torqued. Okay, friend, we finished our installation. Now the next thing you have to do is pump up your brake pedal. Make sure it feels firm. After that, take your vehicle for a road test down to your local alignment shop. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.